Are you ready? So how are you feeling? You all wound up for the excitement of Christmas? You getting there? No? I see someone looking a bit... I know someone who wants to sleep told me not to talk too loud. How are you feeling? Christmas is coming. Whether we're ready or not, it's coming. Whether we want to sleep through it, feel sad about it, get wound up in the hype and excitement of it, it's coming. No, there are only 21 more shopping days. And Christmas comes, doesn't it? Loaded with expectations, loaded with all sorts of feelings. Some good, some happy, some sad. But whether we're Christian or not, whether those 21 more days are exciting or fearful, this season, this Christmas season, sits in our calendar, whether we're Christians or not Christians. So much of the year seems to focus on it. You know, it's a bit like that little boy says at the end of the warehouse ad. Have you seen that warehouse ad where everyone says, how are you feeling about Christmas? You know, and they're going on holiday and they're doing all sorts of things. Have you seen the ad? At the end of it, there's a little boy getting into bed. And he goes, oh, and he pulls the blankets up to his chin and he says, feels like I've been waiting for it all year. And I know just how he feels. Do you know that one? Do you know that one, Helen? That waiting for Christmas? You know it's coming with all that we have to do. Well, I'm always ambivalent about this time of the year, I have to own. There's a heap of questions that go through my head. Does Christmas really belong to the church, and has it got away on us? Does Christmas, or should Christmas these days, really belong to the list of secular holidays? And are we trying to take it over? Then I think, should I take a minimalist approach to Christmas and save myself a lot of angst? Or then should I go all out and make it a really big celebration for family or friends with lots of presents and lots of special food and heaps of decorations? Or should the festivities and the celebration be focused on the Christ child story? Should they be focused on celebrating the year past, the family and the summer holiday, and forget all that church story stuff? Should they be focused on the church's liturgies and music and pageants and outreach dinners? It seems many people wonder the same thing at some time or other. Those same questions swirl around. It seems some have resolved them one way, and some resolve them another. And some are still experimenting, 1 year this way and 1 year that way. It seems there's no one way to manage Christmas. However it is for you, it's a time of year that brings with it many complex feelings and emotions. Whether we're Christians or not Christians, Christmas figures largely in our annual calendar. Why is that, I wonder? What is it about this Christmas season that we can't ignore? Well, apart from the incessant advertising, that is. I wonder if we would still be celebrating this midsummer, midwinter festival if it wasn't for Jesus. Today is the second Sunday of Advent, and there are 2 more before Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, and we're right in the middle of that season of preparation, both in our households and liturgically. Last year I also preached on the second Sunday, and I asked a question. I asked, preparing for what? It's still there. That question is still in my mind. And after church this morning, John and I will be opening up an exploration around Christmas, the first of 2 sessions, when we'll try to look a little at the origins and traditions that enmesh Christmas, and try to prize open space for our contemporary responses as we look at what the gifts Christmas brings to us. So in a way, this sermon/lecture, because it's a bit of a lecture this morning, is an introduction to that exploration. I want to begin by noting how difficult it is for us to scrape away the accretions that have attached themselves to this season in the liturgical calendar. We tend automatically, without thinking about it, to put the Christ child, as we say, centre stage, as if that is who and what this season is all about, the birth of baby Jesus. The family, the gifts. But is it? Are we sure about that? There are centuries of magnificent art, and I dare say thousands of pieces of music and songs about the Nativity. But the question remains, is this season really about a baby? Historians have shown us that there was not much interest in the nativity aspect of the season prior to the late 3rd century of the Christian era, at the earliest. And it certainly was not celebrated as a festival prior to this. The early church, as it emerged, was concerned with shaping its identity, telling a story about its origins, and positioning itself as different, very different, from the surrounding religious framework that it was growing up in. It was establishing itself different from the Saturnalia festivals and the return of the sun in the midwinter season. That was a key festival. And it was separating itself out from those who celebrated the birth of the emperor, the son of God, the god Apollo. The focus on the baby Jesus was not of concern until well into the 4th century. The Council of Nicaea in 325 did not recognize Christmas. The term had not been invented. There was some recognition, however, that it would be good to celebrate Jesus' birthday, but on what date? That wasn't agreed. The first documented evidence of the Western Church celebrating Christmas was not until 25 years later, 354. The Eastern Church sometime later, and it also agreed the Church needed to celebrate Jesus' birthday, but insisted that 6th of January would be the correct date to do this. And that's still the case in the Coptic Orthodox Christian Church today. When the writers that we know as Matthew and Luke were writing their Gospels, about 50 or 60 years after Jesus' death, and Luke perhaps even as late as 70 or 80 years after his death, the baby and any suggestion of Christmas as we know it was not the issue. The emphasis was all about establishing authenticity for the movement and an identity for Jesus that could be recognised as significant. I mean, it's only when a person has become important to a significant number of people that interest grows about their origins, and we start to look back and look for their threads of continuity that explain their adult life and their adult significance. I mean, we tend to not look at our babies and say, oh, you're going to rise up to be this, that, or the other. Sometimes we hope that's so, but we don't sort of put it on that little baby seriously. That's full of hope and anticipation. So when the adult Jesus became so important, they wanted to look back and say, well, what were his origins? What were the threads in his childhood and his early life that made him so important? They didn't know. They built a story. At the time of setting down the record, the concern was about establishing a solid genealogy and shaping a story and images that could capture imagination and raise up a following. It was about separating this cult, for that's what it was seen to be at the time, from Roman ideas and locating it in a distinctive position in relation to the Empire of Rome and the promises of the emperor and the behaviours and the divinity of the emperor, as was commonly understood. Matthew and Luke were offering an alternative to the empire and its power. And in doing so, they were continuing the work of the prophets, of John the Baptist, and of Jesus. They were mobilizing opposition to the oppressive regime that had ruled this part of the world for a very long time, hundreds of years. And remember too, that the temple in Jerusalem had been sacked by the time Luke sets down his gospel, and the Jewish people were being brutalized once again and dispersed. Matthew and Luke set about telling their stories about Jesus' nativity very differently. They differ on many details and emphases. But today we can say, while these stories are not historical or factual, they are filled nevertheless with truths. And they certainly point us towards the power of their gospel messages. Matthew's emphasis is on linking Jesus with the stories of the First Testament. We heard that in this morning's reading. He does that in order to establish Jesus' credentials and to appeal to the Jewish people who are now gathering around the Jesus story with its theology so very different from the dominant Roman imperial theology. Matthew uses the First Testament device of dreams to announce key moments and key issues into the story. And Luke was very free in his reinterpreting and reassigning of the names and titles and images identified at the time with the emperor. Images and titles such as the Son of God, the Son of Righteousness, Light of the World, Saviour of the World, King and Lord. Matthew has a focus on the men in the story and on how power is used. His telling of Jesus' nativity is dark and foreboding, figuring death and displacement. And we heard some of that in the reading of the Gospel. Luke, on the other hand, puts the women in the story centre stage, along with others who are powerless. The shepherds, for example, the very bottom of the heap, but even in doing so links us back to the shepherd King David. His gospel is full of energy, and the activity of the Holy Spirit is core for him and continues to be so through his gospel. His is a joyful telling, full of light and hope for all people, Jews and Gentiles alike. Biblical scholars suggest that for those of us reading these origin stories today, it's helpful to see these two nativity stories as overtures to their respective gospels, summaries of what will be developed. And we'll talk more about that in our sessions after church. But the question remains, why, in the face of all that we know nowadays of history and science, why does this season, with its story that has become centred on a baby, figure so strongly in both our secular and our liturgical calendar? I don't know. The best way I have of approaching that question is to understand that the stories carry both a personal and a political message, and because of that, are powerful. Both of these dimensions were important at the time of the initial telling of the stories, and both have remained powerful through the centuries since, whether we are aware of these two dimensions or not. On one level, the stories touch us in that place of our deepest human longing, that place where we yearn for love, for acceptance, goodwill, justice and kindness. And on the other, they challenge us to use our imagination and our desire to create a better world where everyone has enough, where lions and lambs lie together, where there is equity and justice. The images that come to mind at this time of year are of babies, mangers, light, and gifts, of trees and feasts and family. Indeed, all the traditions that have accumulated around Christmas, including the excesses and the disruptions, are all symbols of the deep political truths and the dreams of a transformed world that the initial storytellers, Matthew and Luke, were pointing us toward. They turn upside down our usual expectations. Babies become leaders. Light overcomes darkness. They remind us that year by year the sun will rise again in the middle of winter. They remind us that we need to see the cracks in business as usual, and tell us that if we want things to change, it cannot be business as usual any longer. If we want peace and goodwill in the world, in all the world, things must change. Light can break into the darkness, and it will not be overcome. So welcome to the complexities of Christmas. I pray that, like all good sacraments, whether we are aware of it or not, we will be expressing once again our dream of heaven come on earth, bringing peace and light and goodwill to all with it. That it will come strengthening our desire to overturn all that diminishes and constrains the fullness of life, and it will bring with it a strengthening of our willingness to work for heaven here on earth. So when you engage in gift giving and candles and beautiful music and families and trees and all that what you do at Christmas time, feasting, remember they're symbols of how the world could be all the time if we would work for it and dream of it and engage with it. Light will break in and overcome the darkness. Peace can come to all the world with justice and with love. God bless us all. Amen.